Hello and welcome to this mobile music production course. My name is Mike, popularly known as Mikiriles or Drillers Beat. In this course, you are going to learn how to make beats, how to record your song, how to mix and master your song using just your mobile phone. But for you to be able to make a good music, first you need to have a little understanding of music theory. It's not a compulsory that you must know music theory before you are able to make beats or make music. I know a lot of music producers that don't have any music theory knowledge, but they still make beats and make music. But knowing the basics will go a long way to help you in making better music. So in this video, I'm going to take you through the basics of music theory before we go into the main production of music on mobile phones.
Well crafted.
Like the realist.
Music theory is the language behind music. It helps you understand, interpret, and communicate about music. Every one of you understand it when someone speaks to you in your language. And you also can easily communicate your idea to someone else in a language that you both understand. And they will get the idea effortlessly. Music theory does the same. It helps you understand how chords, notes, and melodies work together. And as you get good at it, you will be able to use it effectively without even thinking about it. You can easily communicate about your music idea to a fellow musician or producer, and they will understand exactly your point. So to get started, we would start with notes.
Well crafted.
Like the realist.
In music, a music note is the representation of a musical sound. So this right here is the representative of a piano or a keyboard. Now let me zoom in on this so that you understand what's going on. If I should randomly press on the piano keys here to play it, this means I'm playing some kind of note, some kind of musical note. There are only 12 notes in music. Almost all the music you have ever heard are made up of 12 musical notes. The 12 notes are divided into two parts, which are the white and the black. The white notes are named A to G, and the black notes are named relative to the white. Back to our mobile piano. As you can see on the piano, we have C4 to the lower left of the screen and C5 to the lower right of the screen. So from C4 to the last note before C5 are 7 notes. And to the upper side of the piano, there are 5 black notes. And these black keys, together with the white keys, make up the 12 notes we talked about earlier. Now, to the name of the notes. So let me quickly turn on the lettering and also zoom out a little bit so that you can have a proper view of the piano. Now, to the left of the screen, we have letter A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and back to A. Oops, the last A is not supposed to be included as it is the repetition of the first A on a higher pitch or octave. Because in music, we only have from A to G, and it starts all over again, repeating itself. The name of each of the notes here is the same as the letter on it. But on a real physical piano, you won't see the name lettered on it. So I'm going to take off the lettering now and show you how you can identify the notes without the letters on it. Now the letters are gone, but by default we have the letter C, which I cannot take out because that is how the software I'm using right now is programmed to be. And this is because the letter C, or rather the note C, is the most popular note on a piano. And the simple reason for this is because on the C major key scale, there are only white notes without the blacks. And this makes it easier for a beginner to practice and learn piano keyboard, starting with the C major key scale. Now, I just made mention of key and scale, and you might be wondering what that is. Don't worry, we are going to go deeply into that later. Now, let's take a look from C4 to C5. By the way, the movement from C4 to C5 is called an octave, and the same applies to every other note on the piano. For example, from note A to note A above or lower the note is also an octave. So between C4 and C5, there are two sets of black and also three sets of black to the right. Now you can use this pattern of layout to figure out the names of the notes even without the lettering. Now, to the left side of box 1 with two black notes is the note C. And in the middle of the two black notes is note D. To the left is note E. So whenever you look at a piano keyboard and you can find these two black notes, you can just think of C, D, E. C to the left side of the two black notes, D in the middle, and E to the left side of the two black notes. Also, with the same method applied to the box 2 with three black notes, you are going to find note F to the left, note G between the first and second black group, and note A between the second and the third black group. Then note B to the right of the three black groups. If you can memorize and internalize this, you won't have any difficulty finding the notes on the piano, as this is the core information you need that will help you find every other note on the piano. As said earlier, the black notes are named relative to the white. The first black note in the group of two is above the note C. So it is called C sharp. And it is also behind the note D. So it is also called D flat. Yes, you are right. If you are thinking, does that mean the black note has two different names? Yes, depending on the context that you find it. For example, if you are in a scale that has both the white C and the black C, which is the C sharp or D flat, without the white D in it. In a situation like this, the proper way to name the black note is to name it after the note that is not in the scale, which is the note D, the white D. And this is simply to prevent a note name from appearing twice. So instead of having C, then C sharp, that might be confusing. It is preferable to go from C to D flat. Now, you might not understand all of this at first, but it is totally normal. As you go along making music and coming back to this video, they will all start making sense to you. So I will advise from time to time, you come back to rewatch this video, and it will amaze you how something you thought you don't understand at first would start becoming clear to you. So the same applies to every other black note on the piano. Let's take the G sharp for example again. The G sharp is also called G sharp or A flat because it is above the G white note and the A white note. So it is called G sharp or A flat, depending on the context. As said earlier, there are only 12 notes in music, but I believe you must have noticed a whole bunch of notes all over here. Same notes repeat lower and higher. A lower A sounds the same as higher A, only that the lower A plays a low pitch and the higher A plays a higher pitch. The same applies to all the notes on a piano. A lower C also sounds the same as higher C, only that the lower plays a lower pitch and the higher plays a higher pitch. A movement from note C to another note C, higher or lower, is called an octave. Same applies to every other note on the piano. A movement from note A to another note A, higher or lower, is also called an octave. The piano is divided into octaves, and we have about 7 octaves on a piano. The most obvious and visible octave on a piano is the C octave. Looking at the piano, you can see it repeat itself over and over. A movement from a note to the next note beside it is known as a half step or a semitone. And a movement from a note over a half step to the next note is known as a whole step or a tune. Music or beat is then built on the relationship between these notes, which brings us to key.
Well crafted.
Like the remix too.
In music theory, the key of a song or a piece is the group of pitches that forms the basis of a musical composition. In case you don't already know what pitch is, it is how high or low a note sounds. Okay? To make a music or a beat, you need to build it on a particular key for it to sound good. For example, the C major key consists of all the white notes from any C note to the above C note or the lower C note. So this means if you are making a music in the key of C major, then you are expected to use only the white notes on the piano. Let's take the G major key for another example. The G major key consists of some white notes and a black note, which are the G note, the A note, the B note, the C note, the D note, the E note, and the F sharp note. Notice that I called the black note F sharp when I can also call it G flat. This is because there is already the G note in the key of G major, which is the root note. So instead of having G come up twice, we would use the relative name of the black note that is not in the key, which is F sharp. Note, on every key, the starting note is also called a root note, apart from the letter name. For example, in the key of C, the C note is the root note. And in the key of G, the G note is also the root note. Now let's take a look at another example using the minor key. So the D minor key consists of some white notes and a black note, which are the D note, the E note, the F note, the G note, the A note, the B flat note, and the C note. Now notice, this time I called the black note B flat when it can also be called A sharp. This is because there is already note A in the key. I will introduce you to a formula you can use to find all the major and minor key on the piano by yourself shortly. But before then, it is important you know that key of a song is also referred to sometimes as a scale. In case you hear someone say C major scale, they are actually referring to the C major key.
Well crafted.
Like the remix.
The major key of any note can be found using a simple formula, which is WWH, WWWH, where W represents whole note and H represents half note. Also, the minor key of any song can also be found using a slightly different formula, which is WH, WWH, WW. And just like in the major key formula, W represents whole note and H represents half note. Remember earlier when I said a movement from a note to the next note beside it is called a half step or a semitone, and the movement from a note over a half step or a semitone to the next note is called a whole step or a note. Now, we are going to apply this movement with the formula to find the major keys and minor keys. Remember, the formula for a major key is WWH, WWWH, which is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So let's start with the very obvious, which is the key of C major, and find the major key. So to start from note C as the root note, we are going to move a whole step over the first black note of the two group of black notes to note D. Then another whole step over the second black note of the two group black notes to note E. Then we move a half step to note F, and a whole step again over the first black note of the three group black notes to note G. Another whole step over the second black note in the group of three black to note A. Then another whole step over the third black note in the group of three black notes to note B. Then finally, half step back to note C, which is the root note. So we just use the WWH, WWWH formula, which is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, to confirm the key of C major note, because that is quite obvious because it is all white notes. Now let's try it on a different note that has black notes in the key. Let's try it on note E to find the E major key. I know in the E major note, I know the E major note has 4 black notes in it. So let's try it with the formula to see if it's right. So starting from note E as the root note, we are going to move a whole step over note F to F sharp. then another whole step over note G to G sharp, and a half step to note A. Then another whole step from note A over the last black note in the group of 3 black notes to note B. Then whole step again from note B over note C to C sharp, and another whole step from C sharp over note D to D sharp, and finally a half step from D sharp back to note E, which is the root note. You can continue like that from the last note E again to find the keys in the E major on the next octave. Using the whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So as you can see, we actually have 4 black notes in the A major key, like I said earlier, which are the F sharp, G sharp, C sharp, and D sharp. So the formula is correct. Now you can apply the formula. You can apply the major key formula to any of the notes on the piano, including the black notes. Let's quickly do the A sharp, which is also known as A flat, that is a black note. Whole step, half step, whole step, half step. So long as you stick to the formula and do it right, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, then you are definitely going to get it right. Now, to the minor key formula. The minor key formula is WH, WWH, WW, which is whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. So let's find the minor key of the note D using the formula. We start from the note D and go a whole step over the black note to note E, then a half step to note F. Now let me draw your attention to this. You must have noticed we are mostly moving from white note to white note as a whole step, and you might get confused thinking a whole step is from a white note to a white note. But in this case of E and F, we are moving from E to F as a half step, and they are both white notes. Just to clarify, a half step is from a note to the next note, and a whole step is from a note. You skip the next note to the following note after the note you skipped. So in the case of E and F, there is no black note between them. So from E to F automatically is a half step. Now let's get back and start all over finding the minor key of note D. So starting from the note D, we go a whole step over the black to note E, then a half step to note F, and a whole step to note G, another whole step to note A, then a half step to note B flat, and a whole step to note C, another whole step back to note D, which is the root note. So the minor key of note D is D, E, F, G, A, B flat, and C, then back to D. Let's use it on a black note this time. Let's find the minor key of the G sharp note. So starting from G sharp, we would go whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. So the G sharp minor key notes are G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D sharp, E, and F sharp, then back to G sharp. Now, just like the letter names on the note, there is also a number system you can use to identify notes in a particular key. Let's take the C major key, for example. We have the C, D, E, F, G, A, B as the letter name of the notes in the key. So the number name starting from the root note, which is the note C, is 1. The second note in the key is 2. The third note in the key is 3. The fourth note is 4. The fifth note is 5. The sixth note is 6, and the seventh note is 7. This applies to all the keys, either major or minor. The root note is always 1, followed by the second note as 2, and so on till the seventh note, which is 7. Now, this takes us to chord.
Well crafted.
Like the remix do.
A chord is 2 or more different notes played together. Chords are made of notes. Since chords are made of notes and notes are in keys, chords are almost in the same key. Chords set the emotion in a song, which makes the listener perceive the song as happy or sad. The most common type of chord is called a triad, which consists of the root note, the third, and the fifth. Since the piano we have been using is a digital piano on a mobile phone screen, I can't properly play chords on it, so I switch to a piano roll where I can lay out the chords. The piano roll is the same as a piano, but only that you lay out notes instead of playing it. So let's make a triad chord of the C major key. You already know the C major key consists of all the white notes from C to A, then back to C. So to make a chord out of the C major key, we are to use only the notes from the C major key. So starting from the note C, which is the root note, we are going to make our first triad chord using the C4. By the way, C4 is known as the middle of the piano. If you take a proper look at this piano here, you are going to see from C0 to C1 to C2, C3, C4, and so on. Like I said earlier, the piano is divided into octaves. So from C0 to C1 is the first octave on the piano, and C1 to C2 is the second octave, and so on. All the notes in C1 octave are also tagged with 1. For example, note G in the C1 octave can also be said to be G1, and the note D in same octave can also be said to be D1. So if your song is in key of D, D1 to D2 becomes an octave. The same with D2 to D3, and so on. Same applies to all the notes. They take the number tag of the C octave they are in, and if your song is in any of the note apart from the C note, that note to the higher or lower note becomes an octave. Notes below C4 are usually low in pitch, and notes above C4 are high in pitch. So the C4 is the middle of the piano, and this is where notes sounds not too high pitch and not too low pitch. So let's go ahead and make a triad chord in the key of C, starting with the root note, which is note C. Remember, I said earlier, a triad consists of the first note, the third, and the fifth. So we are going to lay a note on the first note, which is C, and the third note, which is E, then the fifth note, which is G. Now, we have made a triad chord from note C in the key of C major. If for some reason you place a chord note in the key of C major outside the key of C major, it is not going to sound good. For example, let's take this G note and place it on the G sharp, which is not in the key of C major, and hear how it sounds. If you have a good speaker or headset and a good listening ear, you can already tell it does not sound as smooth as the former. Note, you can make both a major chord and a minor chord from both major key and minor key. Now, let's make a minor triad chord, also from the key of C major, this time using the second note in the key, which is note D. Let me loop this so it doesn't go back and play the first chord we have laid out for now. Okay, so let's place a note on note D. Place another note on the third note from D in same C major key, which is F. Then the last note on the fifth note from D in same C major key, which is A. Now, we have made a minor triad chord in the key of C major. Remember, as said earlier, the chord sets the emotion for a song. So major chords sound happy and minor chords sound sad. Now let's take a listen to the major and minor chords to confirm that. It's obvious the major sound happy and the minor sound sad. So this means if you want to make a song sound happy, then you are to use mostly major chord. And if you want to make a song sound sad, you are to use mostly minor chord. Another way you can think of making a triad chord is to play a note in the scale, skip a note in the scale, play a note in the scale, skip a note in the scale, play a note in the scale. And that is the C major chord. In all the keys, there is a chord which is rarely used in music. It is called the diminished chord. In a major key, it is the seventh note of the key, and in the minor key, it is in the second note of the key. This means if you try to make a triad chord in the seventh note of a major key, you are going to end up with a diminished chord instead. So let's take the C major key, for example, and find the diminished chord. The seventh note of the C major key is the B note. So let's start by placing a note on B, then place another note on C, which is the third note from B. Then place the last note on note F, which is the fifth note from B. Now, if you look closely, you are going to notice that the pattern of this triad chord is different from the pattern of the major and minor triad chord we have discussed earlier. So let's quickly lay out a triad chord again so you can take note of the pattern. The first is a major triad chord and the second is a minor triad chord. As you can see, the pattern of the major chord is 3 notes in between the first and third note, then 2 notes in between the second and third note. That's 3, then 2. That is another way you can find a major triad chord in a key, so keep that in mind. It is the same for all major triad chord. Now, if you look at the minor chord, the pattern is the reverse of the major chord pattern. 2 in between the first and second note, then 3 between the second and third note. Also keep that in mind to use in finding and laying minor chord in a key. 3, then 2. Now back to diminished chord. If you look at the pattern of it, it is neither 3 then 2 or 2 then 3. Rather, it is 2 then 2. And it always happens on the 7th note of a major key and on the 2nd note on a minor key. So take note of it. It is rarely used in music, and that is because it doesn't sound that good. Now let's take a listen to it. Okay, another type of chord I would like to touch before we proceed from chord is the 7th chord. The 7th chord is simply a triad chord with the 7th note from the root note added to it. Take the C major triad, for example. By adding the 7th note, which is note B, to it, it becomes a C major 7th chord. Same goes with the minor chord. Same goes with the minor chord triad. Once you add the 7th note to it, it becomes a minor 7th chord. You can use the minor 7th chord depending on the type of sound you want to go for. The 7th chord sounds more fuller than the triad chord. Here is a formula you can use to find all the chords in any given key. The formula to find all the chords in a major key is major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminish. And the formula to find all the chords in a minor key is minor, diminish, major, minor, minor, major, major. With this formula in mind, you can always find the chords in any key. So let's take the C major key for example and find all the chords in it. Notice I constantly keep using the C major key for examples. This is because it is the most simplest key on the piano, as it consists of only the white notes. So it is best for examples and to start practice with. Once you understand a lesson very well using the C major key, you can then easily apply it to the other keys on the piano. So again, the formula for finding chords in major key is major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminish. So starting from the C note, which is the root note, we are going to lay a major chord. On the second note, we are going to lay a minor chord. On the third note, we are going to lay another minor chord. Then on the fourth note, we are going to lay a major chord. The fifth note is also major chord. Then we lay a minor chord on the sixth note. and finally a diminished chord on the seventh note. Remember when I said a diminished chord always happens on the seventh note of every major key? Good. So the seventh note here is a diminished chord. Now, if you look, you will see the formula played out just right. So you can take this formula and apply it to any other major key and it will work just fine. Now let's use the minor chord formula to find all the chords in E minor key. The E minor key consists of note E, note F sharp, note G, note A, note B, note C, note D, and back to note E. So applying the minor, diminish, major, minor, minor, major, major formula, we are going to lay a minor chord on the first note or the root note, which is E. Then a diminished chord on the second note, which is F sharp. Again, remember when I said earlier that a diminished chord always happens on the second note of a minor key, right? Okay. Now we lay a major chord on the third note, which is G. Then a minor chord on the fourth note, which is A. Another minor chord on the fifth note, which is B. Then a major chord on the sixth note, which is C. And another major chord on the seventh note, which is D. As you can see, it also plays out in the formula: minor, diminish, major, minor, minor, major, major. So, that is how to find all the chords.
Well crafted.
Like the remix too.
In musical composition, a chord progression is two or more chords used in a piece of music played one after another. Now, this is a G major chord progression, and the first chord is a G major chord with a break in between, followed by an A minor chord, then the D major chord, back to a brief A minor chord, then resolve to the G major chord, which is the root note, all in the key of G major. So with this, we have a chord progression going on in G major key. This isn't the only pattern to lay out chord progression. It only depends on the kind of song you are making and how you want the song to be perceived. So let me show you a different chord progression. This is a chord progression in the key of F minor, with the first chord in F minor, the second in A sharp minor, the third in F minor, and the fourth in G sharp major. So with this, we have a chord progression going on in the key of F minor. Now let me draw your attention to something. Notice how this chord progression sounds sad. This is because it has most of its chord in minor chords. Only the last chord is in major chord. Remember, I said earlier that to make a song sound sad, you would mostly use minor chords. And to make it sound happy, you would be using mostly major chords. Now let's listen to it again. Then I will switch back to the first progression, which has more of major chords. And you will notice it sounds happy compared to this. Now let's go back to the first progression and take a listen. This progression has just one minor chord, and it's the second chord. I believe you can tell this sound bright and happy compared to the other one.
Well crafted.
Like the remix too.
Chord inversions are chords in which notes have changed position but remain in the same note. If you play three notes, which is a triad, there are three inversions you can make out of that chord. You use inversion to make your notes occupy a consistent range and produce a rich quality sound. Back to the F minor chord progression in earlier lesson. We are going to see examples of chord inversion with it. Let's listen first so we can tell the difference the inversion would make. Now, if you look at the second chord, the third note is on a high F note, and with that high up there, the progression will not be consistent in range. So what we can do is to invert the last note and bring it to a lower F, so the progression would occupy a consistent range. Let's do the same for the fourth chord. Now let's take a listen. Now it's occupying a more consistent range. You can tell by listening to it before and after inversion. By the way, this inversion is called second inversion. As said earlier, if you have a chord of three notes, then there are three inversions you can have out of it. Inverting the first note is called first inversion. Inverting the second note is called second inversion. Inverting the third note is called third inversion. It continues like that if you have more than 3 note chord.
Well crafted.
Like the remix.
Melodies are single sequence of notes played along with chords, usually above the chord. Again, we have a chord in earlier lesson here, but this time a melody has been played along with it in higher octave. With this, we have laid down a structure or a foundation for a musical instrument. From here, you can start adding other instruments to fit the kind of music you want to make. There are 4 basic elements of making a musical beat. 1 is chord, 2 is melody, 3 is bass line, then 4 drums. Note, beat making is not limited to only the elements mentioned above. You can include other sounds depending on the kind of genre or style that pleases you. So, we have come to the end of this part of the course, which is the theory. We can now proceed to doing the practicals in subsequent videos. But before we say over and out, I want to let you know that if there is any part you don't understand, it is totally normal. Nobody ever understands music theory at first take, but as you continue doing music and coming back to it, it will start making sense and becoming clear. So I encourage you to go on making music and come back to this video from time to time.